Alan Jackson stood on a Nashville stage in front of 80,000 people, and for the first time in 36 years, his own daughter looked at him and didn't see her dad. She saw the legend everyone else had always seen. How does that happen? How do you watch a man your entire life and still miss the size of him until the very last night? That's the question this story is really about. Not the #1 hits, not the awards. The moment a daughter finally understood what she'd been standing next to her whole life. Here's the thing about growing up around greatness. You don't notice it. If your dad walks out under stadium lights every summer, that's not magic to you. That's just Tuesday. The roar of a crowd doesn't sound extraordinary if you've heard it since before you could talk. It just sounds like normal. That's what it was like for Maddie, the oldest of Alan Jackson's 3 daughters. 36 years of tour buses and sound checks and stadium floors. 36 years of watching her father become someone else the second he stepped into the light, then turn back into the guy asking about her day the second he stepped off. Then came June 27, 2026. Nissan Stadium, Nashville. 80,000 people packed in for a show called Last Call. One more for the road. Not a hiatus, not a see you next tour, a finale. One word, closing the door on one of the great careers in American music. Gently, but for good. Maddie was there, like always. Except this time, something in her cracked open. She looked out at those 80,000 strangers. People who'd never met her father, who only knew him through songs on the radio. And she finally saw what he actually meant to people who weren't family. She felt the size of it for the first time. And afterward she sat down and wrote something that confirmed what fans had quietly suspected for years. The man they thought they knew had been carrying far more than anyone realized. To understand what that night meant, you have to go back to where this whole story starts. Not Nashville. A little town called Newnan, Georgia, about 40 minutes outside Atlanta. The kind of place with more churches than stoplights, where people build things with their hands, because that's what their fathers did. Alan Eugene Jackson was born there on October 17, 1958, the youngest of 5 kids. His dad, a mechanic named Joseph, wasn't a man of many words. He said what he needed to say through what he fixed and built. His mother, Ruth, held the household together the way working mothers in the South always have. Quietly, constantly, without anyone noticing how much weight she was carrying. The family wasn't dramatically poor. They were just careful. Every dollar accounted for, every bill watched. The house Alan grew up in was literally built around his grandfather's old tool shed. Not next to it, around it. The shed got swallowed into the walls of the home, and years later Alan turned that detail into a song. Because that's what he did with everything that mattered. He sang about it plainly, so it wouldn't get lost. There was no formal music training in that house, no piano lessons. What there was instead was the radio. George Jones, Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, drifting through the rooms like weather. Alan soaked it in, without realizing what it was building inside him. In high school, he met a girl named Denise, and something locked into place that never came loose. Not through everything that followed. He was the mechanic's kid, with a guitar, and a voice that stopped people mid-sentence. She believed in him, before he'd given her any real reason to. They married in December 1979. He was 21, they had next to nothing, and they packed up and drove to Nashville anyway, on nothing but a feeling that this was what they were supposed to do. Nashville does not go easy on newcomers. It never has. Alan and Denise spent years in that brutal in-between space nobody talks about. Too far from home to turn back. Not close enough to what they wanted to touch it yet. Denise worked so Alan could write and chase every meeting that led nowhere but kept a door cracked open somewhere. The break, when it finally came, arrived through Denise. She was working the Delta counter at the Nashville airport and spotted country legend Glenn Campbell in line. She walked up, told him about her husband, asked if he'd listen. He said yes. That conversation helped crack the industry door open. It sounds too tidy to be real, but it happened. And the person who made it happen wasn't an agent or a manager. It was a wife, who was willing to walk up to a stranger and say, "You need to hear this man sing." By 1989, he had a record deal. By 1990, his first number one, Here in the Real World. By the end of that decade, he'd become one of the defining voices, alongside George Strait and Randy Travis, of a movement that pulled country music back toward its roots, away from the pop gloss Nashville had started drifting toward. What made him different was simplicity that wasn't actually simple. Writing something that sounds like it couldn't have been written any other way, that's one of the hardest things to do in any art form. He had the words for small moments: a summer afternoon on a river, a man sitting in the same chair his kids grew up around. And he had the words for the enormous ones, too. When September 11th happened, songwriters all over Nashville scrambled to respond. It was Alan who wrote the one that lasted, "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" Written in a single night, performed weeks later, and it didn't just get played, it became part of how the country processed that grief. But behind the hits, the marriage was being tested in ways nobody outside the family saw. In 1997, Alan admitted to infidelity. He didn't dodge it or explain it away. Denise lived through that wound and later wrote about it, about the faith that carried her through the rebuilding. They separated briefly. They came back. 46 years of marriage later, that's not a footnote, it's the whole foundation. A real marriage, not a perfect one. One that cracked and got rebuilt into something sturdier than before. Now here's the part most fans didn't know for a decade. In 2011, Alan was diagnosed with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, CMT for short. It's an inherited neurological condition, one of the most common in the world actually, affecting roughly 1 in 2,500 people. It slowly damages the nerves that control movement and feeling in the arms and legs. No cure. No way to reverse it, only management. He got it from his father, the same father whose tool shed became the bones of the family house. The disease traveled the same road the music did, father to son, generation to generation. And for 10 years, he told almost nobody. He kept touring, kept recording, kept walking onto stages and giving audiences everything, while something was quietly taking the ground out from under him the whole time. He finally spoke about it publicly in 2021, telling NBC's Jenna Bush Hager plainly, "It's genetic. There's no cure. It's been affecting him for years." And yes, he knew fans had probably noticed him stumbling on stage. Think about that for a second. Every show you might have seen between 2011 and 2021, he was managing something invisible the whole time, adjusting his footing, compensating in ways built to keep the audience from ever noticing. By March 2025, at the Grand Ole Opry, the disease's progress was visible in a way longtime fans immediately clocked. Then came May 2025, and a show in Milwaukee that turned out to be his last regular full-standing tour date. Except he didn't stand for all of it. He told the crowd flat out that he was winding down, that this was likely his last road show. From that point on, when he performed, more and more of it was done seated, because standing through an entire set was no longer something his body could reliably do. He sat down, and he sang, and the voice hadn't lost a thing. Which brings us back to Nissan Stadium, June 27, 2026. 80,000 people in the seats, plus a broadcast audience far beyond that. Alan pledged $1 from every ticket to the CMT Research Foundation. More than $2 million raised in a single night for research into the disease that had been dismantling his body for 15 years, while he kept showing up anyway. That's not just a farewell concert. That's a man turning his own diagnosis into a tool to help the people who'll inherit it after him. Maddie stood in that crowd and watched her father walk out one final time. She'd lost count of how many of his shows she'd been to over 36 years. But this one hit different. Afterward, she wrote that it was surreal, humbling, that watching 80,000 people show up to honor him left her in awe, and that somehow, after everything, he had still managed to outperform her expectations. Read that again. A woman who had watched her father her entire life, who knew every high and low of his career, and everything the road had cost their family, said he still exceeded what she thought was possible. That's not a small compliment. That's the whole story. confirmed by the person closest to it. There's more to who Maddie is beyond that night, and it matters, because it shows exactly where she got her strength. In 2017, she married a young attorney named Ben Seligman. 11 months later, on a family boat trip, Ben slipped on a wet dock, fell, and hit his head. What seemed minor turned out to be a brain injury doctors couldn't reverse. He died at 28. Maddie became a widow before her first anniversary. She did what her father had always done, with the things that hurt the most. She turned it into something that could reach other people. She wrote a book called Lemons on Friday, about grief and faith, and later another, Through the Valley of Grief. She built a nonprofit, Nashville, supporting widows and women walking through their hardest seasons. She rebuilt, slowly, the way real rebuilding always happens, not in one dramatic turn, but in the quiet accumulation of survivable days. She remarried in 2023 to Connor Smith and became a mother not long after. Her sisters, Allie and Danny, built their own lives too. Allie became the first to make Alan and Denise grandparents, and by 2026, the family had grown to 5 grandchildren between the 3 daughters, each one carrying a little piece of the story forward. There's a moment in every great career where the audience realizes, without anyone announcing it, that they're watching something that won't come again. For a lot of people, that moment came in Milwaukee, watching a man who'd filled arenas for over 3 decades sit down in a chair at center stage because his body no longer gave him a choice, and sing exactly as well as he always had. He wasn't retreating, he was adapting, the way people from small towns who grew up understanding that resources run out have always adapted, by finding a new way to do the thing that matters, instead of giving it up. And when his daughter asked him on her podcast back in 2023 whether there'd ever be another album, he didn't hedge. He said yes, he'd hope so. 3 words, but they carried real weight, coming from a man who by then knew exactly what music cost him physically, and was saying, without any self-pity, that the cost hadn't outrun his willingness to keep paying it. What Alan Jackson built isn't just a catalog of 35 #1 songs and 75 million records sold. It's proof of something bigger. Proof that a kid from a tool-shed house, with no connections and no formal training, can walk into Nashville and change what country music sounds like. Proof that a man can carry an invisible, degenerative disease for 15 years and still fill a stadium. Proof that a marriage can break and be rebuilt into something stronger. And proof that even a daughter who watched from the closest seat in the house for 36 years can still be caught off guard by the size of what her father actually was. So here's the question for you. Was there a song of his that found you exactly when you needed it? Was there a moment, a drive, a wedding, a hard week, where his voice said the thing you couldn't say yourself? Drop it in the comments. Tell us where you were. Tell us what it meant. And if this story moved you even a little, hit like, share it with someone who grew up on his music, and subscribe for more of the stories behind the names that shaped American music. Because the truth is, the best ones are still out there waiting to be told.